Hey everyone, and welcome to another special video for this channel. Now, on today's episode, I figured I might as well just give you guys the top 10, or rather the top animated Disney classics that have meant the most to my childhood. So, and I'm not really going to be giving you guys any specific order on these. I'm not going to give you like an in-depth review. I am just gonna give you kind of a quick overview. I might do a more in-depth review of these later on because I do own, I think, every single Disney animated classics there is, starting with obviously Snow White from 1937 up until the most recent one. So with that in mind, I'm just gonna go right ahead and talk to you guys about the Disney animated classics that has really defined me from childhood to manhood. So with that in mind, I'm gonna obviously start off, and of course, all of these I have all the physical copies right here, and obviously there are gonna be the Norwegian title on the cases, so I'm pretty sure most of you can figure out which one I'm talking about, but just in case you're confused, I'm just going to also let you know which one there are. So obviously we're gonna start off with Lion King from 1994. This is still to this day my personal favorite out of all the Disney animated classics. Yeah, sure, it's a little bit overplayed, but you know what? I don't care, I'm biased. Because this came out when I was 4. I still remember the soundtracks. For the most part, yeah, some of the songs I kind of feel a little bit burned out on, but at the same time, I still enjoy them. I still enjoy The Circle of Life. Can You Feel the Love Tonight? Yeah, okay, I can maybe deal with it like a couple of times a year. Be Prepared is fantastic. It's probably become my favorite out of all of them. Hakuna Matata is obnoxious. I don't care for it anymore. So yeah, I really enjoy it. I mean, I obviously it's largely based on the Hamlet. So if you're a Shakespearean fan, then you know what, more power, more power to that. I mean, yeah, I don't really know what to say. I mean, yeah, it is Hamlet, obviously, with animals, with lions. So, and also it happens to be one of the first tattoos I got. So I'm not gonna show you where it is, but I do have, yes, I do have a Lion King tattoo. So moving on to the next one, which of course has to be Aladdin. And this one, yeah, it has both great great things about it, but it also have a few flaws. The biggest flaw excuse me, has to be also its greatest strength, which of course is Robin Williams as the genie. I find some of the comedy not really holding up all that well. Don't get me wrong, the movie is still good. It has great animation, great color work, great characters, obviously. Obviously, the genie is the standout naturally, but some of the humor hasn't really aged that well. When he does impersonations, I mean, unless you were living in that time, you wouldn't know that he's doing like Robert De Niro from Taxi Driver. You don't know that it's Jack Nicholson. You don't know that he's doing an impression of Rodney Dangerfield. Um, so those are the kind of things that now starting to hold it back. But I still think it's great. I really do enjoy it. Next one has to be Pocahontas. My mom used to had this on VHS, and yeah, considering the fact that this came after Lion King, actually it kind of baffles me. Because the story is kind of bland. I don't really care much for the characters, and Colors of the Wind. I mean, if I never heard that song again, I wouldn't lose sleep over it. So, um, yeah, not necessarily a big fan of that one. Not necessarily a big fan of that one. Next one up for me is obviously we have Hunchback of Notre Dame. I think this is probably one of the most underrated Disney animated classics in the Disney library for me. Yeah, I think, yeah, the story is pretty dark. I mean, obviously it's based on the Victor Hugo story, and if you know anything about the story, you would know that this is not a very faithful adaptation. But I still think the characters are great, even though they go for obviously for more of an ugly duckling story. I think Quasimodo is a great and protagonist. I still think Claude Frollo is still one of the great Disney villains, and Hellfire is still to this day my favorite all-time favorite Disney villain song. Yeah, you can remove the gargoyles. I find them obnoxious. In fact, when I was a kid, the first time I saw it, I was maybe 6, maybe 7 years old, and I initially thought that Quasimodo was imagining them, and when we get to the kind of to the climax, not to necessarily spoil anything, but yeah, they're real. And I remember as a kid, it it kind of ruined it a little bit for me, but I still rewatched it. But yeah, I still think this one is great. I mean, for me, pretty much like Lion King and the Hunchback of Notre Dame, I still would give like a 4.5 to a 5 out of 5. So yeah, so those I think are great. Now moving on, of course, obviously to a new one, another one, which has to be obviously Robin Hood. Yeah, great adventure story. I really love the medieval side of things. Of this story, yeah, it's done with anthropomorphic life forms, but I still think Sir His and King John is hilarious. I've always thought that since when I was a kid. Yeah, the animation is probably a little bit too sketchy, but yeah, you know what? I don't mind it. I find it actually, even though I find a lot of the Disney classics from like the late 60s to like the mid 80s, I personally don't really like that very pencil sketchy animation, not necessarily working for me, but for this one I actually find it kind of charming, so I really like that one. Moving on, of course, I mean, I grew up strongly with this one, and you know it has to be on here in some form of some capacity, and it has to be Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It's kind of a de facto that it has to be on somebody's list, because without it we wouldn't have the Disney World that we know and love. Yeah, I mean, it's just a great fairy tale. I admire it for, if anything, for its simplicity. Its emotional simplicity is what really makes it work for me. And even, yeah, and of course, I mean, the characters are simple but likable. The story is very simple but enjoyable. I still have high hopes stuck in my head to this day. So obviously that is one that really helped define my childhood. Uh, Next one up, and of course, because I'm a dog lover, I have to put this one up. Lady and the Tramp. Uh, I really One thing that I really like about this one, and one thing that I absolutely despise about the remake, is that the original is made purely from the dog's perspective, how they see the human world. Now the remake is made them more. I'm sorry to just go off on a tangent on this, but man, they really didn't get it and get what made the original so great. Um, but yeah, I in fact, I had a friend of mine. She saw the remake and she told me that after 20 minutes she turned it off and had to put on the original. So that, if that tells you anything about it, yeah, that's kind of the extent of just how bad it is. But I really like the original. I always been a dog lover, animal lover. I grown up with dogs. I love dogs, and the fact that if anything, I really like it. I like the atmosphere in the movie. I think also the characters are great, and it's really enjoyable. And I'm gonna say this right now: if you only know the current or more modern Disney films, you need to head back to the Silver and Golden Age because there are some true gems inside that. Next one up for me obviously has to be Alice in Wonderland. Alice in Wonderland is I love the novel as a kid, and this one is for me one of the perfect adaptations of it. It captured the whimsy, the abstract nature of everything, how everything is kind of backwards and upside down. I really like, just even though it's predominantly short, let me just check how long it is. Yeah, 75 minutes. That's what I thought. Even though it's 75 minutes, it has uh, so much whimsy, so much greatness, such a bizarre world, and so many bizarre characters she comes across, and you're just with her on the journey. And I think it's just a spectacular movie and a spectacular adaptation of the novel. It's a perfect encapsulation of the entire novel, if you ask me. So obviously you need to check it out. And coming down to the last few ones, obviously, again, because I'm a dog lover, obviously 101 Dalmatians. Obviously, yeah, this one has more of that sketchy animation. But much like Robin Hood, for me, it kind of works. I love the jazzy soundtrack to this. I think also all the characters are very loving. They're very fun. Like, I mean, especially Cruella, which is so bombastic and so over the top. It makes her more memorable, and I think she has really a very dark, obviously the idea of killing a bunch of Dalmatian puppies to make a fur coat, it's kind of dark. But at the same time, she is very compelling, how she's designed, how her character behaves, and just the people that she has for her sidekicks in Horace and I think it was Horace and Jasper. And I think they really make the movie for me. Just those three, like, just how much of the Three Stooges, I wouldn't necessarily say the Three Stooges because it's a kind of a little bit of a different thing, but that's kind of what I compare them to, just the comedy between the three. So obviously next one for me, but yeah, I still really like this one. I would probably give it this, at the same time, 4 stars. Yeah, I'll save that for another time when I go into more of an in-depth review of those. Next one up for me has to be Pinocchio. Dark story, obviously a pretty dark story. Again, much like following in the footsteps of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It has an emotional simplicity to it, but I still think it's really charming. I really like the characters in it, and I think it has a very endearing and very innocent and naive character in Pinocchio. And he is a kid, and he at least learns from his mistakes, so I'll give it that. So it's a very endearing and a very earnest character for me. And finally, the last movie that really helped define my childhood, it is The Great Mouse Detective. And yeah, it's actually, if you know by translation, it's actually called the Master Detective Basil Mouse. So yeah, this is probably the most underrated in the Disney catalog, post, I would say, pretty much one of the best in terms of, yeah, okay, I'm sorry, I'm basically just stumble across my words here. I would say out of all the Disney movies made in the dark age, in Disney's dark age, which would be 1970 to 1988, this for me is the best one. Second best being Robin Hood, best one, The Great Mouse Detective. And the reason why is because it has a great mystery, it has a great lead character, obviously is based on Sherlock Holmes, it has a great villain in Ratigan, obviously being voiced by Vincent Price, which makes it even better. I think it's just a great pick, and it's a great flick. You should definitely check it out. And with that in mind, I would say there's a good chunk of these that I'm going to be reviewing eventually, all of these hopefully. So if you want to check that out, make sure that you stay updated on that. So with that in mind, I hope you guys stay safe and hope you enjoy your day, your evening, your night, wherever you are, and make sure to stay safe. So